Hello, welcome to FJX 2000 Productions. Today we will be replacing the lower control arm bushings on my 2008 Toyota FJ Cruiser. So lately on my FJ, I've been having a lot of weird driving issues, specifically with the steering feeling pretty loose. But after replacing the inner tie rods and knowing that the outer tie rods are good, the only looseness that I could imagine it coming from was from the lower control arms, since I recently rebuilt the upper control arms. I just not too long ago replaced the ball joint on my lower control arm on this side, because this side is the older side. That side, the whole lower control arm was replaced with an OEM one. But this side got replaced back in 2017. It is a Moog lower control arm, and the ball joint had gone bad. So I replaced the ball joint with a 555 one from Japan. And I also noticed, I'll try and get some video footage of it. I went ahead and removed the tires so I could try and show you what I could see with my naked eye. So looking at this bushing on the front of the lower control arm, it's hard to see, but the shape of the rubber that comes out is not very uniform. There at the very top, it's kind of squeezing out in a misshapen pattern. And just from the cracking sounds that I hear as I turn, it kind of sounds like popping and all sorts of weird noises. And I put the GoPro down here and was able to film from back here, the rear of the lower control arm. It has a lot of play in it. And I'm thinking that whenever I stop, it kind of wants to pull to one side whenever I'm pressing on the brakes. And I just think it has to be that lower control arm with those bushings going bad, with the amount of play it has and with the misshapen bushing boot in there. When I get it taken out, I'll show you a little better what I'm talking about, but it just doesn't feel or drive quite right. So we're gonna replace those bushings on this lower control arm, and hopefully it'll be driving nice and happy again. First things first, I need to remove my lower control arm skid plate from Ricochet off-road to be able to get some tools in there to undo the lower control arm in general. Removing that will make life a lot easier. So let me go ahead and do that. There we go. Now that the lower control arm skid plate is removed, I'm going to go ahead and undo the bolts down here that hold on the ball joint, not the middle one, but these two side ones. And I'm also going to undo the bolt that holds on the shock. And then we'll move on to getting the actual bushing bolts out, the cam adjusters. All right, so at this point, after removing all those bolts, I'm gonna go ahead and before I undo anything over here, any of the cam bolts, all these cam adjusters, I'm going to make some markings on there so that way I can line them back up properly once I get everything put back together. All right, so using the impact wrench with the little angle bit that allows you to go at an angle from where the drill is, I was able to undo this bolt. I just undid the one on the inside, and then I could pull it out from the other side, and here it is. The last time I replaced these lower control arms, I smothered it with anti-seize, so it just pulled and slid right out. It was perfectly great, exactly what I wanted to have happen. So now, we're gonna move on to doing the forward cam bolt. Well, I ended up having to remove the skid plate entirely, the front skid plate, so that way I could access this bolt right here. As I talked about earlier, I got that rear one just fine, but this one with the skid plate in the way, it was just not happening. So here we go. I'm going to throw the impact wrench right on here and undo that and pull it all apart. And after that, the lower control arm should be able to drop right out. Sure enough, all that anti-seize that I put on last time really helped this time make things go pretty smoothly. And now the lower control arm is removed. Now to the main event, replacing the bushings. So I have the lower control arm here in this vise, this bench vise, to keep it in place and to show you these bushings. So the smaller one is going to be the one that goes in the front, and the bigger one is the one that goes in the back. Here I have the replacement ones. Like I said earlier, this is a Moog lower control arm that I replaced back in 2017, and that means that these bushings lasted about 3 or 4 years before kind of biting the dust. And these, the ones I'm replacing it with, are Beck Arnley, and I just ordered them through rockauto.com. And this will be the rear one that replaces that, and this is the front one that'll replace that. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to remove those, but first I want to show you kind of what had gone wrong. So if you look at this bushing, kind of the rubber part right up here, that's right outside this metal collar, it's kind of deformed a little bit. It's hard to tell exactly, but when it was installed, you could tell easier. And this is what a new one looks like. It's nice and straight. You can't see the rubber kind of flaring out in any particular direction. But what's really worn out, like I tried sticking this in there and moving it around, and this one isn't too bad. It doesn't move around a whole lot. But the back one, if I stick this pole in there, I can wiggle it around, and it has quite a bit of play, and it might be hard to see, but if I bend this over and look down in there, you can actually, at least in person, see how the rubber boot inside is torn. It's actually literally torn the rubber part of the bushing on the inside. So it just has lots of play, and that's what we don't want. We want to replace that, and then hopefully things will go back to normal driving wise. So this is the setup that I'm going to use to attempt to remove the bushing. We'll just set it up on one end, and then when we're going to do the other one, we'll just flip it over and do the same thing. We have just a bottle jack right in there in between the arm, sitting on one side, sitting on this side. We're specifically going to be trying to press out this top one, and we'll just crank the jack. But meanwhile, I'm also going to be applying some heat onto the metal part around the bushing to help expand that metal and hopefully make that pop right out. From the videos I've seen of other people doing the same thing, it hasn't shot out like crazy, but definitely be aware of that could happen in some crazy scenarios. So let's try and do this. So as I was pumping this and heating it up with our blowtorch, I also was hitting it with this punch up under the edge, and you can see the pressure is now causing the whole thing to rise up. The rubber is coming out too, and it might be hard to see, but you can tell how it's actually ripped in there. And I think it was ripped even before I started pressing on it. But as we keep pumping, we might be able to see as this bushing is slowly coming out. I'll continue to kind of persuade it with our punch and hammer and make it keep coming out, but we're getting there. Well, that was a bit exciting. Just moments after recording that last segment, I kept pumping and it started coming out, and then it all just kind of popped out all at once. And the jack is right there, and our bushing is right there. It's kind of steaming. It's really hot. It's hot out of here because I was heating it up with that torch. So I'm gonna leave that sit for a little bit since I don't wanna melt my gloves or burn my hand or anything. But we have one bushing out, one to go. All right, I have our whole operation set up the opposite way, so that way we can press the rear bushing out. I have the jack set up, and hopefully we don't get as crazy of an explosion this time with the ball joint, or the bushing coming out. I'm gonna press it, heat it up, and hopefully we get it out safely. Well, unfortunately, this bushing is giving up more of a fight than the other one did. I was able to keep pressing on it, and the boot just kept tearing on the inside, the rubber did, until it finally just pushed all the way through. I tried hammering around the edge, and I tried heating it up like I did the other one, but it just didn't want to come out. So now I'm going to take a saw of some sort, stick it down through there, and kind of cut the metal sleeve on the inside without cutting this outside circle. Like, I'm going to make sure that this stays intact, but right here. And that way it can hopefully make it so it gets looser and we can hammer it out this way. So here's the setup I'm talking about. I just have our saw right through there, and I'm just going to saw at the metal sleeve until we can relieve that pressure and those tight clearances of that metal sleeve on the inside, and then we can remove that sleeve hopefully by hammering it out. All right, I just got done sawing. I just sawed a little groove right down there, and then I just kept hammering, and now the sleeve comes right out. So now we begin the process of putting new ones back in. So now we're going to get to the point where we push in the new bushing. I'm going to try and use the bench vise, and when you're doing it, you don't want to press on this piece of metal that's attached to the sleeve on the inside, because that'll just press and could damage the rubber on the inside. You want to be able to press on this metal sleeve on the outside, right here on this edge. So what I've done is I've taken this pair of pliers that open up nice and big, and I'm using the bench press on the metal sleeve part on the outside on this little lip. So that way we're not compressing the inside and damaging it trying to press in this new bushing. So we're gonna keep compressing this, and hopefully it does the job. It looks like it's moving in, and I put some anti-seize on the inside of this sleeve to help kind of act as a lubricant as it's going in there. So let's see what happens. So the bench vise was not getting the job done, so now I'm using a shop press to press it in. Basically, I have a metal cup that's the right size as that metal sleeve lip, just sitting right there. Then I have a little cap over that so that the piston has something to press onto. And then you have to have something underneath that's about the same size as this sleeve, but can allow the bushing to press out the other side, because there's that metal part attached to the rubber that will come out through about to this point, and you want it to be able to just go down freely into some sort of cup. So I have this large one on here so that way it can go in there. So I'll just keep on pumping it and it'll keep going in, and then I need to do the same thing to the other one, which I got started but need to get in the rest of the way. On the lower control arm, I was able to get the front one in because I rented a ball joint press kit from O'Reilly's, and they had a series of different cup sizes and caps that you can use to press out or press in ball joints. And in this case, it worked out good using with that bench press, because one of the cups is the perfect size for that. But unfortunately, none of the cup sizes are the exact right size that I need for this lip. The only one that's close is this one, but it's just slightly too big. When I try to put it on there and press, it just wants to slide one way or another. When you put it on there with your hand, it's like, oh yeah, great. But then when you actually try to press with it, it just wants to slide off one way or possibly bend the sleeve. You can see where it kind of got a little bent right here already. But at this point, I am not sure exactly what to do. I will check in when I figure out a solution. Here we are a couple days later. I was able to take this control arm to a shop, and they were able to push in my rear bushing the rest of the way. With the tools I had, the incorrect cup sizes, I just couldn't make it work. And for the amount of work that this has been, I understand completely why most people just replace the entire control arm in general, which is what I did last time. But this time I decided to figure out just how much work it would be to replace the individual components. And it's a bit of work. So I recommend, if you're doing this, maybe not to, but if you have the tools and the know-how, then go ahead and give it a try. But at this point, I think we just have to put everything back on, put it all back together, and we'll be on our way. So at this point, I have the arm back up there. You can see I put lots of anti-seize on those surfaces inside of where those bushings rest, so that way there'd be no seizing possibilities in the future. And I had to kind of persuade it up in there using the rubber mallet, but now it's up there pretty close. You could use a punch or something big like a rod to kind of get it centered a little more. We're gonna put the bolts in and all the hardware and get it all back lined up. You can see those marks I put on there are associated with the marks that are right there on those tabs. So that way I know how to line it back up roughly close to where it was before. So you can see that I'm getting this hardware put in. I really did not hold back when it came to the anti-seize. You really want to make sure you don't have it get stuck in the future, because if you're doing this for the first time and it's already seized, you might have had to cut the bolt just to get it off, and then you'll have to use new hardware in general. I was lucky enough not to have to do that, but you definitely don't want to have to deal with that situation. But before you really tighten things down, even after you get all the hardware put back in and everything is going good, you want to bolt everything back up and make sure you do not tighten the cam bolts just yet. You'll want to lower it on the ground with the tire and everything to its normal resting position, and then you'll really tighten down those bushings. If you tighten it down beforehand and then you lower it onto the ground, it might cause binding on that rubber bushing and then just tear it when it's brand new, and you wouldn't want to damage it before you even get to use it. So just make sure you put it on the ground before you really tighten these bolts down and get everything set where you want it. But make sure that it's tight enough that when you lower it on the ground, you're not gonna cause something to snap. Here we go. So I have it tightened up, but not too tight. Watch this. I'm gonna be able to still move the control arm, but see how that rubber bushing turns with it. We're not having any binding. And it's still loose enough that I can put our wrench on the cam adjuster and I can still adjust the caster and camber, whatnot, but we're not gonna be bending and twisting and tearing that rubber bushing, which is what we want. All right, at this point I have both the front and rear lower control arm bolt on. I have the shock mount on. I bolted it up to the spindle, and I made sure that both of these were loose enough that the rubber bushing was not going to bind. And now we are ready to put the tire back on, drop it on the ground, and then really tighten up those bolts. And at that point, this job is done. My work won't be done because I have to put all the skid plates back on, but that's all that is involved in replacing the lower control arm, really. And in this case, if you go with the bushings, it's a bit more work, but same idea. One of the things that I did that made life a little easier was I undid the sway bar bolt. That made it so I could drop this a little more, and it gave me a little more freedom with the lower control arm. But you might have noticed that I still had a brace underneath it, just another jack stand, to make sure that none of the cords were gonna be pulled too tight and nothing was gonna split the brake line or the ABS sensor. I wanna make sure that you keep everything in good condition. We have our tire back on, and now we can go underneath and make sure that all of our little alignment tabs are lined up. We're gonna make sure that all these markings are still in the correct place, and then we can tighten everything down, torque it down to spec, and we'll be good to go. All right, at this point, we're all set to go. I went ahead and put the tire back on, tightened the bolts, got everything lined up to where it should. The tire might look a little wonky because I just lowered it down on the ground with the jack, and you have to kind of roll it forward and backwards a couple of times for it to be in its somewhat normal position. But I think I'm gonna go take a test drive with it before I put all the skid plates back on. As far as this project goes, we are all done. That is how you replace the bushings on an FJ Cruiser lower control arm. It isn't a very fun job, and if you don't have the right tools, then you might have to go to a shop and have them do the pressing and whatnot. But there you have it. That's how it's done. Luckily, I only did it on the one side. My other control arm is it's only about a year old, and it's an OEM one, so it's perfectly fine. But that other one was a Moog arm again, and just within the last month, I've had to replace both the ball joint and now the bushings. So Moog lasted about 3 or 4 years, and that's on a pretty well off-roaded rig. Maybe a different brand of arm would last longer, but going OEM is of course the best choice. But hopefully this helped you. If you have any questions, just leave it in the comments below and I'll be glad to answer your questions. All right, I just got back from taking the FJ on a test drive. I don't have the skid plates buttoned up yet, but I think that replacing those bushings did the trick. No longer am I experiencing those same popping and weird cracking noises that were happening, especially when I'd turn the wheel at low speeds or come to a stop or take off from a stop. And I think we just really nailed the issue here. It's not exactly the easiest way to get it done, but we got it done. If you liked the video, like the video and consider subscribing. Check out some of my other videos where I go off-road. This was just a maintenance one, but I have plenty where you get to see the FJ in action. So thank you for watching. We'll catch you later and have a great day.